welcome to the stage. How are you, Dana and Mandar?
Doing great, David. Super excited to be here. A little bit nervous. I took a peek at the people list who's watching, and I'm like, those are some people I know. So, like, don't screw up too bad.
Hey, David. Super excited to be here.
Yes. Well, I always like to remind folks in situations like this, people typically don't remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel. And, Dana, you have that energy that makes me feel super comfortable. And Mandar, I'm so excited to finally be able to catch up with you. I'm secretly an investor in Masterclass. I have to disclose it, before and I'm a user of GitHub. Actually, I love both of y'all.
Same here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I'm going to dive right into the questions here. So this first one, and feel free to chime in, either of you, hand it off to the other if you'd like. What do you think a manager's role is in helping his or her engineers understand how their work connects to the company's mission?
Yeah, I can take the first stab at it. So I think manager's role is extremely critical. But before getting into the manager's role, I would like pull it up a little bit in terms of why is it important from both the sides. From the individual side, I just feel like I'm a firm believer in one of the principles that Dalio talks about in his book, which is more like if you align your passion with your work and do it with the people that you love, work just becomes fun. And I genuinely believe in that. It leads to intrinsic motivation about what gets you going. And in my opinion, intrinsic motivations always supersede extrinsic motivations, like be it promotions, be it dollars. If you're feeling motivated internally, I think it's just going to show up in your work. And especially in the kind of macro that we are in, when things are not as great overall, I think if you enjoy the work that you are doing, it's just going to make like big difference in your day-to-day happiness. So that's number one on why. On manager's front, I think it's incredibly important and critical role that the manager plays, because as a manager, you are the closest to your employees and the situation and the work that they are carrying out. And in that sense, I would say like you know your team the best. You know what every individual on the team gets going with, like what are their motivations, what gets them motivated, what do they feel passionate about. And if you don't know that, like if you are hiring someone new on the team, if you don't know that, invest that time. Like have those one-on-ones, build that trust relationships. A lot of times, like engineers may not open up right away. Like some of the engineers are a little bit introverted. So make sure that if you have like different personalities, you're tailoring your one-on-ones in certain way and establishing that trust relationships so that you understand what motivates the individual on your team, and then tie it back to the goals of the organization and the mission of the organization. And I'm sure we'll discuss more about that, but that's how I think about it.
Dana, any additional reflections from your end?
I mean, to echo a little bit of that, but also, bring it a little bit more, if people don't know me, I really believe in like, I don't know, we're all in this together and serendipity and all that woo-woo stuff that we love. Because, I think we think about life purpose and happiness. Happiness can be fleeting. This year has told us anything that like, boy, howdy, it's been up and down. And so I can personally say that my happiest tank isn't where it typically is. But life fulfillment is one of the small things that we can do, is finding that purpose, right? We want to have purpose. And like Mandar said, as a manager, you have that connection with your team. It's easy to write those goals and get that like gamification happiness moment. But serving that purpose of why you do it. When I was a manager at New Relic, I sipped that Kool-Aid so hard. In fact, I'm actually sipping out of a New Relic bottle, and I have not worked there in a million years. And the thing as a manager, I resonated with that mission. It wasn't because I loved application performance monitoring. I actually do. But because I love the purpose of helping people get their time back, helping people get to sleep at night, being so connected to that mission. And as a manager, I was just like, we are helping change people's lives. And I know you're not always going to find that with everything that you do, but as a manager, you definitely have to feel it first. If you're not connected to the mission, people are going to read into your BS. Be authentic, find your purpose, make it more about that less about that short-term happiness and that long-term personal fulfillment for living and why you're doing what you're doing, right?
I love it. So both of you, I hear, Mandar, from your side, you talked a lot about, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators, right? And I want to remind folks who may not be familiar with those terms, right? Extrinsic motivators are like kind of like the carrots and sticks, if you will, the things that, you can poke and prod that maybe aren't as meaningful. Intrinsic motivators being the things like love and meaning and purpose and those things that really like drive sustained engagement. I'm reminded from like the product design perspective, Amy Jo Kim, who's this like amazing gamification expert, she likes to call it systems for sustained engagement, talks a lot about how extrinsic motivators are great for onboarding customers. Intrinsic motivators are great for sustained engagement. And I think about it as you were talking about this, right? That same is true at work, right? You got those extrinsic motivators when you're like in the hiring process and when you're onboarding folks, but then when they're actually there, you need to switch to some intrinsic motivators if you want to keep them coming back and staying loyal. So, and I appreciate, Dana, what you're describing about, you got to have that meaning and that purpose, and that's where that intrinsic motivation comes from.
Very, very true. I think on that front, David, actually, even during the hiring, we do double click a little bit on the intrinsic motivations too. Like you're 100% right that extrinsic is something that you're a little bit indexing more on during the hiring. But I do ask like a few things just to make sure that, because at the end of the day, what gets you going and the kind of work that you will be doing at the company, you want to make sure there is a match, right? Like there is that parity going. But totally agree that during the hiring process, like you may over-index a little bit on the extrinsic side. Very true.
Sense. I'm going to dive into questions from folks. We already have a few. So this first one from Michelle, what would be your guidelines for people moving up from individual contributor to a senior manager? This could relate specifically to, purpose and the stuff we've already talked about, but it can also just be answering the question as is, because we got a lot of folks that want to learn.
So your guidelines for moving from IC to senior manager. I mean, I think everybody has the capability to lead from any seat, right? You want your team to really, when you are mission-based and you are connecting your work and having your objectives, really, you're talking about having everybody take a part in fulfilling what you're doing and those outcomes. So that leadership should be demonstrated. And it doesn't mean like push everybody into being like, team lead or whatever, but giving the autonomy and agency to actually make change happen, to manifest that velocity on your team. And I think when you're making that transition, you should start honing that craft now. There's no better time than now, because you've already had demonstrated probably, hopefully where you're at as a senior engineer, that you have the ability to lead, mentor, and teach and bring up those around you. The next translation is just expanding that scope and having a greater level of impact, and then taking on more things that, frankly, need a higher level of execution and experience. But it's definitely the N plus of that skill set that you already should have been curating. So I think finding that spirit, and the special thing about going on a track from an IC to a manager role is like, you already have some of that street cred. Typically, I'm going to say engineers, right? We can all be brats and be like, who are you? You don't know what I'm talking about. You're just a manager. But when you come from a role that resonates with your team members and you have that respect and you've shown that you can lead from any seat, it should be a somewhat natural progression. And if not, like, this is an opportunity for you to go and do some 360s, find those gaps, find areas where you can improve upon. Maybe you're really great technical, but you need some more help finding how to have better interpersonal relationships, because it's not about just, running through tasks and stuff. So work on those skills. And I'm curious, Mandar, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you hit on so many right points, Dana. It's amazing. One of the main things is moving from IC to, if you're a first-time manager, make sure that you are not getting pulled back into just like, hey, I'm going to do coding myself. Your job just changed. What you're supposed to be doing just changed. And it's the main principle, and the one thing that I think about as any leader, not just first-time managers, is your team is your biggest asset. Make sure you're investing in them. Like the two things that I talk about at length with all of my directs is, as a leader, you have two things that you have to worry or think about. One is the servant leadership aspect, which is your people is, again, your biggest asset. Make sure you're investing in their careers. Make sure you're growing them. Make sure you're making them feel valued, right? Give them space to fail if they are failing. Make sure that you're guiding and coaching them. That's the servant leadership aspect. The second side of the coin is what I like to call, you should be, as a manager or as a leader, you should be an immaculate, like, organizational engineer. And just to elaborate a little bit on that front, like what that means is, You just moved from writing features to owning an organization or a team. Think about your team as a machine which has goals and outcomes, and you're measuring your outcomes and comparing to the goals. And what goes into that machine is not just code anymore. What goes into that organizational machine is your people, is your processes, is the technology. Like, these are the different levers that you have, and these are the three key components that you have inside the machine. And now you need to figure out the right strategy, the right structure. Do you have the right talent on the team? Are you making sure that the team members on your team are growing in their careers? Are they enjoying the work that they are getting? From process standpoint, are you establishing the right cross-functional processes or even intra-team processes, and be it retrospectives, be it roadmap planning? From technology project standpoint, again, execution is 100% critical. Make sure, are you measuring the right things? Is your team working as a unit in achieving the goals that or outcomes that you have to get to the goals? And don't forget that the main responsibility that you have is of a decision maker as well. Like, that doesn't mean that you, as Dana pointed out, you don't need to be a know-it-all, but you have the credibility. That's the reason why you got promoted. Make sure that you're bringing that clarity to the team. And in my opinion, like, that makes, like, become an organizational engineer from just a regular engineer. That would be my 2 cents on that.
People, processes, and technology is different levers. I like that framework. And 100%, so many of us have imposter syndrome when we come on the job or when we get promoted. Dana, I appreciate the reminder, like, you're there for a reason, so just go for it. I love that energy. As I was going to get to my next question, I saw in my notes, Mandar, there was a reference here around a Ray Dalio quote around motivation. And I was thinking to myself, well, I love the Principles book. It's one of my favorite books. So I was curious if you could tell me about this Ray Dalio quote around motivations.
Oh, sorry. This is what I mentioned earlier. This is more about, like, align your work and passion and do it with the team or people that you really love working with. I think one of the things that, if you have to, like, figure out or boil down what great work experience is like, I think, like, if personally, it's working with a team that has strong values, doing the work that you really like doing, enjoying or having great team members, like, culturally amazing talent, and feeling valued. Like, if as a manager, as a leader, you can check mark all these 4 boxes, I think you're going to have an amazing team and really, really satisfied members on your team.
I love having a framework is so helpful. I don't know, Dana, do you have, like, a framework like that, or a set of check boxes, or anything you go through when you think about, I don't know, ways to know you're being effective as an engineering manager?
I mean, I think that you have to really source from a lot of places, right? You have to find qualitative and quantitative data, because humans, unfortunately, we aren't a whole bunch of zeros and ones. Well, not quite yet. So it's kind of hard to measure that. And so I think you have to work hard at that and not just do a one-time check. So there are checklists that you go through that I think we all have probably somewhere when we sit and we do our employee surveys, when we go and we get a pulse of the team. And then we also have the reflection of that and the key results of the things that we're doing, right? You get a sense. And, I also think about, like, just DORA metrics in addition, right? Because if you're talking from a software engineering perspective, right, how do you measure productivity? And productivity typically is held and manifested when people are feeling job fulfillment and there's some level of happiness. I know there's a lot of thinking of, like, oh, work, you don't got to be happy. And I'm just using that as a term to, I don't know, I'm always happy. But when you have that, you can see the output with the work that you're doing, but you also need to get a sense of that, how it's implying to your culture. So I probably, would say, don't just check once, have many of those data sets and then check and then recheck. And I'm sure that's something that we all practice, but it doesn't hurt to have that really qualitative measurement, but don't use that as your only informing information. So is what I have to say.
So true. 100% agree with that, Dana. Like, I like to think about, like, management and leadership is, like, part science, part art. And you cannot just have, like, hey, tell me all your frameworks, I'm going to copy them. Like, every person is different. Like, every single individual on a team has something that makes them unique. And that's the best part of it. Like, being a manager, growing different individuals with different personalities, helping in their careers. I think that's what makes it a lot of fun.
100%. You know, when I was the CTO at Doctor.com, a lot of people used to call me Chief Therapy Officer, just because I like so much of that like human component. And you know, for myself, I have a framework for happiness that I got from like 20 years of therapy, which is, you know, I see 3 components to happiness: pleasure, which is like, you know, like chocolate and Netflix, etc. Meaning, right, which is a lot of what we've been talking about, and then good mood, which can be akin to just flow, where your level of challenge matches your level of expertise. And you know, I guess the idea is if you have a framework, you know, to go off of, whether it be, you know, what either of you mentioned, what I mentioned, like having a framework, quantitative, qualitative, whatever, is better than not, because at least it gives you a path, you know, to move forward. I want to jump into some more questions here. This one from Robbie. Earlier, we talked about knowing direct reports' motivations. Any examples of how to drive those conversations, especially for folks who are introverted, for which, you know, we have a lot of those folks in engineering typically?
Yeah, I can take the first stab at it. So first thing I would say is, and again, as a direct manager, this is where the art piece comes in a little bit, right? Like establishing that trust relationship, having these conversations in one-on-ones, and especially for folks who are introverted, what may end up happening is you will give them work, they may do an amazing job at it, but they may not be feeling great about doing the work because they are internally motivated by something else. And I think that's where it's essential for the manager to make sure you have finger on the pulse with respect to what the individual really likes to do. I can speak from a personal experience. I used to have an engineer on the team. She was an amazing backend engineer, actually. She was, when we launched our iOS app a couple of years ago, she was working on the backend. She did really, really good job. Through the one-on-ones, what I realized is it was more like, yeah, you assigned me something, or, you know, the lead assigned me something, I achieved it. And the more I talked to her, I was like, hey, what gets you going? Like, is this something that you're enjoying? And it took some time for her to open up, because again, as a manager, that establishing that trust is so core to it, because put yourself in the IC shoe, right? Like if I'm talking to my manager, I'm going to be, if I don't have the trust relationship, I'm going to be a little measured on what I say and what I don't say, right? And that's where I think as a manager, it's your responsibility to make sure that the IC or the engineer on the team is at ease and they can talk their mind to you. So that's number one. So in her case, we actually realized we through multiple one-on-ones, we realized what she really likes to do is actually more user-facing things. She was doing some Android courses on her own on the side, just to understand how mobile tech works. And we were in the process of thinking about launching our Android app. So we got into the discussion about, hey, how about if we transition you into the new team, would you like to try it out? And if it doesn't work out, we can go back and we can revisit. And we transitioned her into Android team, and she did an amazing job. And that's where the intrinsic, extrinsic, it's really, really evident for me, because she would just like go and crush every single feature out. On her own, she would make sure that the designs are up to date, top notch, talking to the product, getting things going. And like she is one of the key members on the Android team now. So that's the part where establishing that trust relationship, I would say.
Isn't it amazing when somebody who maybe was kind of not doing so great, when you put them somewhere where they just have that passion behind them that they maybe even haven't revealed until you have that one-on-one conversation, and then suddenly it's like they're a completely different performer. You know, I love seeing that. Dana, what's your experience been in this regard?
I mean, yeah, establish trust, right? You're not going to have real conversations if people don't trust you. And, you know, you don't have to have like, you know, unwavering trust, but like, you know, that word trust, like this person and me are aiming for the same thing. We are both aligned that we want to see success, right? Because ultimately, right, who doesn't want to see success at their jobs? If you don't, I don't know, that's pretty weird, but you know, you do you. I think grounding yourself on those affinities that you do share already, like why are you in this, like reconfirming that. But I also think this is also an opportunity, if you do have a framework, to show that you have safety when you share these aspirations, right? So you establish a trust, and maybe you can't pull it out. I don't know. I think sometimes it's okay to have an offsite and have an exercise where it's like, what do we all want to be? What are we all aiming for? I think it's okay to have those life questions, right? Like I ain't shy about it, and some people are, but maybe you find them in a written matter. Maybe if they see their peers feeling okay and open. but you have to have a good culture that nurtures that, because if you don't think about it and maybe you're not there, you don't want to inadvertently turn this into like a dog-eat-dog competition, but you can use, you know, different empathetic approaches to like have people put their guards down and have a space where they can say, this is what I'm hoping to get out of this, or maybe this is what I want to accomplish. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, the thing that's going to, you know, like change your life. It could be as simple as like, hey, I want to learn a new language and be a badass on the Android team because mobile development is awesome. Because if I get to do that, then I'll say, I know how to do mobile development and I can do Ruby development. And if their life goal is to continue on their track as being the most amazing engineer or even manager of all time, you can remind them of like how this is contributing overall to what they maybe want to do. And if they don't know, that's okay. That's also an opportunity to say, let's explore, like you said. And I think as leaders, you know, we are a little bit of a life coach in some capacity, because you spend so much of your life in your job. And so you can't disassociate that too greatly, right? I don't know. That's the way that I look at it. So I think it's about finding the right mix. But definitely, you can't do it without trust. Yeah,
you know, folks have talked about how we're leaving the age of work-life balance and kind of going into an age of work-life integration, right? So this is a world in which it matters, you know, that we talk and interface as humans at work, outside of work. It's just, you know, it's all kind of blending together. So this next question is a little bit of a challenge question in that it, you know, obviously, if you have someone that's not happy doing something and you can move them and they're doing something happy, like great, when that works out. But sometimes you might have a project that nobody wants to do. Somebody's got to do it and nobody's excited to do it. So this question from Chris is, do you have an example of a time when you were successful convincing someone that the value of some work, you know, which maybe they didn't want to perform, was worth doing?
Like every day? I have kids. You know, it's like, come on, it's important that you take the trash out. We don't want it piled up, but I have to say it every day. You know what? I think that comes back to, right, like connecting back to that mission, right? Because there's going to be, you know, garbage collection or debt work or something that maybe, I don't know, that you've been putting off because it's just going to suck. I think you have to connect it. Why are you doing it? You know, like really why? You don't want to give anybody a job just to, like, I don't know, keep them busy, right? I'm never going to give busy work. I think most of us aren't going to give you busy work. I'd rather not have you on the payroll than give you busy work, you know, just saying. So you just, once again, because nothing lasts forever. We have to remind people too, like when you have those really horrible jobs that come up that nobody wants to do, is like, this isn't going to be forever. And you better keep that promise. You put somebody on something crappy for a long time, they ain't going to trust you. And then once again, why would they trust you when you just said, hey, we'll put you on this death march forever? I think you recognize that it sucks. I think you tell them once again why you're doing it, because you probably have prioritized it for a reason. And then you have to find some joy in it. You know, some of the things that we do, especially in this, is finding the little mints of joy, right? At GitHub, we did this huge like push for technical debt that we had not done, at least since I've been there. And nobody wanted to do it because, you know what, building features is funner. But we made it fun. We did the corny stuff. We had so much swag with this. People are like, I don't want to hear about that initiative ever again. But I think we celebrated that type of work, because it's super easy to get in there and just be like, oh, look at the fancy customer facing stuff. Or nobody wants to hear about refactoring. I don't know, you got to celebrate refactoring. I think really, especially now, because as you said, as the lines blur and your purpose and your work life start to blur, like you got to continually just find what sparks joy for you personally. And that's the way I continue to just keep on that message. Like if you're doing it and it's prioritized, there must be a reason. And that reason must be for a positive outcome for somebody.
Mandar, does that resonate with you?
100%. One of the things, as Dana mentioned before, and I very much ascribe to that, is be honest. Like don't try to sugarcoat it. If some work sucks, be honest about it. Have honest conversation, because again, going back to the trust idea, is like if you're not being honest, people are going to see through it, and that is very detrimental to the trust that you are building with the person on the team. So be honest, saying, hey, I understand you do not want to do it. This is the reason. And sometimes we all have to do work that we are not really like driven by, but be upfront about it. Have a very honest conversation. Sometimes there are things which are very dry and not as fancy, but it's important for the business. The main part that you don't want to miss out on is what Dana pointed to, is it's important in some respect, right? Think of your company, think of your organization as a system. Don't think of it as engineering is going to do a phenomenal job and we don't care what happens on marketing side. Or your team or your organization is a system, and think from system standpoint. It's sometimes you have to do work which may be more beneficial to other parts of the system. It may not be enjoyable, but as a whole, for the company to win, it's important to do. So be upfront about that part. That's one. Second thing, be honest about saying, I understand you don't like it, but you have to get through it. Make sure you're revisiting that conversation. That's number two. Third one is feeling valued part. I think you have to over-index a little bit on that. Sometimes the dry back of the office ops kind of work gets ignored because it's not jazzy. It's not like, oh, this is a cool feature that we built. Make sure as a manager, you have to be extremely intentional to make sure, bring it up in front of a bigger group, celebrate the victories that you are having on that front. So that's going to add to the satisfaction that the engineers are going to get out of working on the feature. And fourth tool, so this is a tool that I usually use in terms of like tracking happiness. We call it I-score. It's HI score. It's happiness index score. So in every one, I ask my direct reports on 1 to 10, 10 being super happy, 1 being I just don't want to be here. Where are you at? And everyone has a different scale. Like the idea is not to measure everyone to the same scale. The idea is to get a baseline for every single individual on your team. Like I have individuals who I know are always 6.5. Their max is like 7. I have individuals who are always 10 or 11. So when those 10 becomes 9.5, I know something is off. Double click on that. When that 6.5 becomes 7, you know something is good. Double click in that. So that's how I would think about it.
I love that. It's funny how, we think that to ourselves that we need to sell everything to every person on our team to convince them. But it's kind of nice to be reminded that, sometimes people need to put on their big boy or girl or whoever pants and just kind of do the work, but that you can share the meaning and the purpose and the mission that silly thing, like you take out the trash because there's meaning and purpose in having a nice, clean environment,
100%.
or whatever. Well, with that, we have hit time. This time flew by. I want to thank you so much, Dana and Mandar. You both have so much wisdom to share, and I love the energy of both of you as well. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with all of us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you.
See ya.